On the markets, we cross to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. My colleague Nastasia Arendse is standing by. Very good afternoon to you, Nastasia. The board pretty much matching your top. Tell us what's happening.
Good afternoon, Zinga. And that's likely because of the Asian markets, which rose because of that positive sentiment that we are seeing with regards to the US and China. We had the Vice Minister for China saying that the progress and the talks is looking quite positive. And of course, if that does continue, we might see those December scheduled tariffs be taken off the table. Locally, we've seen the JSE start off on a subdued footing. This as investors track the European markets and of course shifting their focus to that Parliament debate that we're expecting to see later on tonight with regards to Brexit. We've seen a flurry of company earnings coming out of Europe, bit of a mixed bag on that front, but investors are also looking at some of the earnings coming through from the US. We are expecting about a fifth of those S&P 500 companies to report numbers later on this week. Some have surprised to the upside, but let's have a look at the markets picture to see how some of these global news are playing out. Well, to unpack the markets a little bit further, I'm joined in studio by Edgar Mafoko from F&B Wealth and Investment. Edgar, thank you so much for your time. Let's kick off with your thoughts around these negotiations between the US and China. It seems as though we're getting some kind of substantial progress on that front.
It does seem as though, yes, we are headed in the right direction. But I mean, of course, we've been here before. I think if you go back to the last year and a half, I think every single time we get close to some sort of agreement, we do tend to go backwards a bit. And I think one is hoping that, this time around, things will work out differently. And I think this time around, it is a bit different as well. If you look at the US President Donald Trump heading into an election, I think having a trade deal in the bag is definitely something that he'll want to go into the election with. But I think nevertheless, we'll wait for more news out of that. But I think the last week or so, we are starting to get quite a lot of positive news flow. I think apart from the trade tensions, you're starting to get a lot of good news around Brexit as well. It seems that, we might actually not get a hard Brexit, rather, which is actually good for the market. And I think you're starting to see that in emerging markets. If you look at a lot of the emerging market currencies over the last week or so have actually outperformed, the developed market peers, which is quite a positive for us.
Given that, then, your assessment of how the JSE has performed this morning?
I think a bit of a mixed bag. I think the strong rand, I think, the one thing to point out. And I think you're seeing that in the consumer stocks. I mean, the likes of your Spar, your Woolies up over 4% at lunch. And I think that comes on the back of a very strong result from Pick n Pay. So I think that has lifted the mood somewhat. You're seeing the likes of your Tiger brands, your AVI. All these companies, have been under pressure for this year to date. But I think a very strong trading update from Pick n Pay really set the tone for the domestics. But I think, looking elsewhere, resources under pressure this morning. A bit of a mixed update from Anglos, Platinum and Diamonds struggling at the moment, but doing very well in the iron ore space. But that's outside of South Africa. Kumba actually not doing so well in the last quarter or so.
Let's unpack Pick n Pay a little bit. A complicated set of numbers to go through, but nonetheless, they were good. Any standouts?
I think standouts would have been the local business. So they actually outperformed the group. I think Africa has actually been very difficult for Pick n Pay. You've had hyperinflation in the likes of your Zimbabwe, for example. So that's, murkied the picture somewhat. But I think the fact that, they're doing extremely well in their home market, I think very positive for the JSE. And I think that's why you're seeing such a very good performance in some of the retailers I mentioned earlier. But I think also a standout in their result would have been their margin actually expanding by about 1%. I think in this very tough environment, I think something to really cheer for the market.
Overall, retailers for you, I mean, some of the factors that are playing into that performance, and also, are you seeing them rely on perhaps even Black Friday and the festive season to perhaps push things up a bit?
It's a very difficult one to unpack. But I think the thing about discounting is that it does erode margins. But I think Pick n Pay has showed that even in this very tough environment where there's more promotional activity, if you do get things right, you could actually expand the margin. But I think for South Africans, I think increased promotional activity has really grown. I mean, Black Friday is something really that came to our market not so long ago. And I think you've got a lot of these retailers that are running loyalty programs, which is something that we never saw in the past. So I think it's extremely difficult to get that balance of having products where you're actually making good margins. And I think we're seeing that in some of the house brands. If you look at Pick n Pay, if you look at ShopRite, so there's been a big push towards expanding those product lines because that's where the margins are. The branded stuff that's well known, that's actually where you're getting a lot of promotional activity, and that hurts the likes of your Tiger brands, for example, your AVIs. So I think it's been more about getting the balance right. As much as yes, you do have a lot of promotional activity. You want to make sure that you've got good high margin products in your basket as well. And I think Pick n Pay over the last year has done really well.
I mentioned in the beginning that, we're still seeing some earnings come through from the US, and some investors remarking that they've actually surprised them on the upside. Has it been the same for you? And which company earnings are you keeping an eye on?
I think it's been a surprise. I mean, if you look at the US banks, that kicked off last week, I think there's been a lot of commentary around, maybe recession coming. But I think the results that we've seen, I think across the board, haven't really been that bad. But I think for me, the one that stood out the most, I would just say the US banks in general. I think a fair result from them. And I think it does show that I think the US for now, is weathering the storm. But I think, it's going to be a very difficult period going forward. But I think we'll wait for results out of the more consumer-centric companies. That's still to come, the likes of your Walmart and all of that. And I think those will probably drive the tone towards the end of the year.
All right, Edgar, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. That's Edgar Mofoko from FNB Wealth and Investment. We're going to take a quick break now, and Nzinga Gunta and Nompumelelo Siziba will be back with more of your news.